feel a bit like I'm unprepared. I'm not unprepared. I'm just
well, you were practicing the names yesterday, so I thought
just give that impression that I'm unprepared. Sorry, hang on, I am a little bit. Can you just bear with me 1 second?
So while Paul's doing that, let me just say to everybody, welcome back, or welcome, or thank you for staying at the IATEFL British Council World Teachers Day event. We are about halfway through an 11-hour jamboree of different sessions. We had plenaries this morning. We're going through a few panel discussions now. This is the second one of those on it, and this is called The Future of Education, which, despite its grand title, is meant to be a look at where education in the context of the speakers, building on the previous stories and videos that we've just been seeing over the last hour. If you are just joining, you have missed events, then we have recorded everything. They will appear on both the IATEFL webpage and the British Council Teaching English webpage. So you'll be able to watch all the recordings, and we'll give you, so there are certificates, we'll give you that information as we go through the day. Very easy to get. So hello to the 600 odd people in the room, and hello to the Facebook live stream. Heike, I believe, is on the live stream there as our moderator, doing a fabulous job, and she's there. If you've got questions for the panel as we go through this on the Facebook stream, then post them there. Heike will make sure they come to us, and we'll do our best to get them in. And Paul, are you now ready?
I am, thank you, Sean.
I'll pass to you then.
Thanks very much. Okay, so yeah, the panel discussion is, as Sean says, looks at different challenges that schools, teachers and learners have faced around the world in the past 6 months, as well as exploring how education systems and learning is changing in response to these challenges. We hope to discuss how the current changes may eventually inform longer term strategies for schools and language learning in the future. And we are very pleased to have our panel with us. We have Georgia Papamichailidou. You can tell me if I pronounced that well or badly. And who is based in Bournemouth, the UK, where it seems sunny, but I don't think it is. At the moment, Georgia is the Assistant Director of Studies at Kaplan International School, International English, Bournemouth, where she specialises in exam preparation as well as teacher training courses. We're also joined by Hala Ahmed, who's a highly experienced academic manager and teacher trainer with a strong background in communicative teaching, materials development, learning technologies and course design, and she works for the British Council, as does Kamini Tanisha. God, I didn't ask you how to pronounce your surname.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, Tanisha. Okay. He's an academic manager based in West India and has worked for the British Council for more than 15 years and has extensive teaching and training experience. Has worked in India and overseas. We're also joined by Graham Stanley, who's the British Council's English for Graham Stanley, who's the British Council's English for Education Systems lead for the Americas, and he's based in Mexico City. He's also the author of Language Learning and Technology, published by Cambridge University Press from 2013, and the editor of Remote Teaching, which is a British Council publication from 2019. And he's also the newsletter editor for the IATEFL Learning Technology SIG. So we have that well represented today. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking time out on your Saturdays to come and talk about the future of education. We thought that probably the best way would be to sort of go around it's not a round table, but a virtual round table, and ask you to really just to sort of talk a little bit about your context, about how education systems have responded, how schools have responded, how teachers have responded in the countries or the continents or the regions where you're living. So I'm going to sort of just go with what's on my right, and we'll sort of go around clockwise. So Georgia, that unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, makes you first.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you for the introduction, Paul and Sean, and hello everyone, welcome to our panel. So as Paul said before, I work for Kaplan International Languages, which is a college for learning English, and we specialize in different classes, especially as Paul mentioned, exam classes. So once the lockdown was announced, we made a shift to online teaching straight away. So the different schools that we had around the UK became one school, which meant that we had to work together with different departments, not just the academic departments and the other teachers, but we also had to work with sales teams, marketing, with head office really closely, so that we can create safe class for our students and we can create an environment for better learning online. So that was an interesting experience, to be honest. Should I go on, Paul, or should I just pause there for the question? Okay. It was interesting in terms of how we had to adapt and the different levels of control we had compared to the levels of control we had in face-to-face teaching. So I think that the two elements that were significant for myself personally was, number one, the different levels of control, and number two, of course, how we used our creativity to go beyond technology and to go beyond online teaching. So how we can still motivate our students, how we can still keep this good atmosphere in class.
Great. Thank you, Georgia. Thanks for that. Hala from outer space, how is it there?
That's cool out there. Hi, Paul, Sean. Hi, everybody. Greetings from Egypt. I'll talk to you about how the Ministry of Education in Egypt and probably the other ministries of education in MENA responded to the COVID-19 crisis, and also how the British Council response was in alignment of the local in-country responses. The Ministry of Education and the many universities wanted really, and they did take some steps to gradually introduce the students and the teachers to remote teaching and learning. They made all the curricula available online, either through asynchronous platforms like Edmodo. For example, in Egypt, we've got 11 million students registered on Edmodo. The ministry automatically registered them to give them access to all of the curricula. Or through the official website of the ministry or a particular university. Also in Egypt, the Egyptian Knowledge Bank has been made as the ministry official online reservoir of a lot of supplementary materials, as well as hosting some pre-recorded lessons to cover different subject areas from the national curriculum. What about the British Council response? Actually, the British Council response in MENA has also been very much in alignment with the in-country local responses through either mapping the British Council available resources against the national curriculum, or providing guidance and advice to the local education systems, or designing and delivering series of webinars on remote teaching or strengthening teachers' networks and communities of practice. And we're doing this really to provide a more sustainable teacher-to-teacher support. So that was a brief introduction on how MENA responded to the COVID-19, either from the ministries or from the British Council.
Thank you, Hannah. Just for anyone who's not sure, the acronym MENA is Middle East and North Africa. Thank you. Okay, Graham, with your lovely background as well, tell us.
Thank you, Paul. Well, my role in the Americas is regional. So although I'm based in Mexico City, I'm actually supporting teams that are all across the Americas, from Mexico, Chile, Cuba, Venezuela, Uruguay, Argentina, etc. So I can give you a sort of overview of what the situation is like here. And obviously in most of those countries, the schools have closed. We have the pandemic, now in the Americas, it's almost the worst place apart from India. I think it's in the top. We've got the US, of course, and then Brazil, and then Mexico as being in the top 4. I think India's number 3 at the moment, as far as the number of cases and deaths are concerned. So across the whole of the Americas, we have school closures, of course, and I think a lot of the work that we do the British Council that is across the Americas, works in English, working with ministries of education on large-scale projects. And we've had to adapt and change our response because the ministries have changed their response and their priorities, of course. So I think there's been a lot of move towards online guided learning, so asynchronous teaching and learning by students using platforms, learning management systems, as well as some remote teaching, so synchronous remote teaching. And then, of course, access is a problem. So over 50% of students in the Americas, and I'm sure this is the same in many parts of the world, don't have access to the internet. So there's a real problem now with trying to provide those students who are at home with education. And just to give you sort of an idea of some of the responses, you know, there's radio and TV being used. So in Mexico, for example, Peru, and even in Uruguay, there are programs being transmitted through national TV stations that try to make up for the fact that schools are closed and try to provide some education to the students. And the British Council in Mexico has been helping with that, with videos. And then a colleague of mine in Peru, for example, just to give you another little anecdote, told me about teachers in one particular town making photocopies using their own money these are English teachers using their own money and delivering them by hand to their students in their houses. So I think what for me is, you know, there are some horrible things going on that mean that a lot of students are without education, that, you know, the whole access to the internet, which I think, you know, more and more as time goes on, it looks like that's something that should be in the future considered even a basic human right, if you like, if we're going to ensure education for all. But I think it's just incredible, looking on the positive side of things, just how associations of teachers, groups of teachers, communities, networks have come together to really support each other and help each other. You know, initiatives like this that IATEFL are running in association with the British Council is just one example of all of that. It's happening nationally in countries, it's happening regionally. And I think everybody sort of moved towards the idea of, look, we just need to make this happen. And I'll finish just by saying something I participated, or rather I listened in on a discussion that the Inter-American Development Bank, the IADB, had this week on what technology can and can't do for education, which I think is something that's becoming more obvious now. And one of the speakers there said that, you know, we need to rethink school as not as a place, but as a service. And I think if we have that in mind, we need to make the service of education work, whether it is delivered in a physical place or online or through radio or through TV. I think the most important thing here for our future, near future in particular, but ongoing, is just to really make that education, rethink it as a service.
Okay, thanks, Graham. That's yeah, interesting. Kamini, we can move over.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I mean, I'd like to talk about two aspects. One, what as a country, what's happened, and what as British Council we've done. So when this sudden shift happened, everybody, you know, took on to remote teaching, private schools, government schools. How effectively that has happened is another question. But what we hear is teachers in private schools in metro cities, tier 1, tier 2 cities have done better than tier 3 and 4 cities. And government has also taken a lot of initiatives to provide, you know, audio-visual mode of, you know, ebooks, journals, platform for teachers to do online courses to get their, you know, upgrade their e-learning skills or trading skills. So all that has happened. But CBSE, which is the Central Board of Secondary Education, they've cut down the syllabus by 30% to reduce pressure on the students because they understand that so much screen time may not be good for the students. So it's it's a change. The emergency response, was there, but going forward, something more has to come out of it. As Graham says, we need to rethink. On the other hand, just like Graham mentioned, large-scale projects, we've also had to change our approach. We went on from face-to-face teaching rather very, very quickly to blended learning with live sessions and self-paced learning. We are also very, very aware that there is this great, given that it's such a big country, the digital divide that exists there, and teachers work in low resource contexts. So we've also broadcast, sessions on state TV channels as and when they've come to us. We've done resources. We send a newsletter with teaching learning resources every fortnight. So we also did, asked one of the teachers on one of the projects to do a MOOC on Future Learn and accompanied it with Facebook Live sessions, which normally don't happen. And also, of course, guidance to ministries of education, courses, English Challenge, 30-day English Challenge course on WhatsApp. So we've done a whole lot. We've conducted webinars with external agencies for Teachers Pan India. We've done a large number of those. So we understand what's going on around us, where is the need, and the need is to effectively build their, digital skills so that they can teach or train. And the other thing that comes to my mind is assessment in online teaching, which has really come to the fore. So a lot happening, lots of things to do more, I'd say.
Definitely, thank you, Karen. Yeah, I think sort of listening to the full review, and also kind of what we all know is that if anything, what the kind of pandemic has done is kind of highlight and amplify the kind of the inequalities, perhaps. A couple of things. I think it's highlighted the inequalities that exist, and not just in countries where you would expect that perhaps, or you would assume perhaps there's no internet, but in every country, within each culture, within each population, within each country, I think there's a huge amount of inequality that's been amplified and highlighted by the pandemic, and particularly the result of what's happening within education. At the same time, I think what it also has kind of amplified and exemplified is the sort of the resilience and the resourcefulness of teachers, both individual teachers and schools and communities and regions and cities and so on to kind of respond to the crisis and ensure that kind of education is something which can continue, and that's happened, I would say, successfully or unsuccessfully. Where it's happened unsuccessfully is not necessarily the fault of individual people, teachers or schools necessarily, but perhaps circumstance. So I'm trying to kind of get to a question here and trying to sort of think what the question might be. I suppose kind of moving forward, or thinking kind of ahead, what kinds of things can we do to sort of ensure that those inequalities, if you like, are kind of addressed and dealt with? So just a small question to start with. How do we make everything better, basically, I suppose, or what steps have you seen and can we do to do that? I don't mind who wants to start with that one.
I can start if you like, just to get the ball rolling. I think the difficulty that we face at the moment, and I think it's interesting, it's unprecedented, is that we, across the world, we don't really know how long this is going to go on for. So in other words, it's very different. The response of school systems, of individual teachers, for example, the ministries of education, it's very different if you think this is going to be over in as we did, I think, naively thought at the beginning of the pandemic, in a few months, because there'll be a vaccine. As things have gone on, now we're in, October, it looks likely that maybe even next October we'll be in a same situation. I hope not, but I do think it's potentially the case. What we're all hoping is that, you know, in 5 years' time, we won't be here. We'll be in a much better place. But we have to think that there is a potential that, you know, looking at the future of education, I think, you know, we tend to only look at the next 5 minutes or the next few weeks or the next month or few months. But actually, if this is going to last 5 years or longer, which could be the case, what do we need to do to actually help students with that, to help teachers with that, to actually make things accessible for the learners that we have? We can't sort of drag our feet, I think. And it's getting to the point, I think, where I suspect that most people are starting to think, okay, look, we need to take a longer term view of this, because that and some of the structural changes that need to take place, if that you know, if that is the case, are going to be difficult, and they're going to be expensive, and they're going to be time consuming. But we need to start. That's my view anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you, Graham, that the management of online learning has to start right from the top. And it is not, we are no longer in the response mode. We've gone beyond that, and it's something that's here to stay. So if it's here to stay, so we need to build capacity of the teachers digitally. We need to make students more aware of, you know, how this works, what kind of flexibility they have. So it's primarily has to be a systemic shift at all levels, government level, institutional level, teachers and students as well. So right through, otherwise it's, you know, just an ad hoc response, you know, just responding to the situation and without really taking a long-term view of it, certainly.
Georgia.
Can I build on? Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Georgia.
Sorry.
Sorry,
We'll come to you in a sec.
I was going to actually mention, because Paul mentioned something really important before, that it's no personal failure if something doesn't work. And I think that this is something that the teachers need to also have in mind, that if the system that we are placed in to teach online doesn't work, if our teaching doesn't work, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is our fault. So one way to simply look back at what we've done and how we can develop from this is, for example, to keep a reflection diary, to see how we started, what worked, what didn't work, and then to take small steps into creating something new. And of course, being open to creative solutions, because as my fellow panelists said before, they found different ways to access education. And let's not forget that this is in other sense, the spirit of a teacher. We're always trying to find solutions in class, whether it is face-to-face or online or hybrid lessons. We're always trying to find solutions. So having that in mind, we need to consider how we can move forward from this, because right now we're going through a change. And even though it doesn't seem like that, it is a kind of a reboot that all education fields are facing at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. Hala, sorry, you want to?
No, that's fine. I can see that we have a consensus here that we need to move forward, and we need to really step out from the survival mode, and we need to go beyond this. So I think one thing we can do to step outside this survival mode and the ad hoc kind of response is to train teachers on how to plan for the future, and how to have and establish a shared vision between teachers, teacher educators, and perhaps school leaders. As Kamini said, it has to touch upon different layers in the system. And when we have this shared vision, we move the teachers from just, you know, from the panic mode, I need to teach a lesson today because my students are out of the school and we need to deliver a chemistry lesson today, to a more of a solid vision of the future. And also I'd like to recap on something that Graham said, moving the school from the place to a service provider, and starting to see the school as or the teaching in general as a human business. It's basically a human thing. I came across something really useful yesterday. It's using the 3 R's to start to think about the future post-COVID, if even living or coexisting with COVID. It's react, and we've done that. We reacted. Recover, like sit back, think, reflect, and as Georgia said, use reflective journals. Think about what you've done, learning from your past lessons, then reimagine. And I think this is perhaps the most important step, is to reimagine what the future is coming ahead. We're not going to go back to business as usual anymore. And reopening the school is not just resuming work, is not going back to business as usual. It's actually stepping into a totally new era. That said, things will remain the same when it comes to pedagogy, when it comes to the human element, when it comes to the role and the importance of teacher. So that's my take on that.
Another thing that comes to my mind is that when we talk about digital, it's not just teaching online, doing a virtual session. Digital just doesn't mean that. And all the ELT specialists and all of us who are into creating content, we need to exploit TV, radio, people who just don't have a smartphone. How do we get to them? Don't have a WhatsApp. So content for all those channels, because only then we'll be able to reach a larger scale, because everybody doesn't have access to the internet, but still being conscious that technology is just an enabler. Doesn't take away from the pedagogy.
We could be very guilty at looking at it through one kind of lens, can't we? And in fact, we need to look at it from several. There's a lot of concurrence with an agreement in the chat box. I don't know if you can see it, but there's also a few questions come through related to what said. So I'll try and feed them in, because obviously we want to answer what the audience says as well. So based on your discussion so far, a few little angles have come up, and one of them is curriculum. I think one of you did say that one of the curriculums in the area had been reduced, but Katie Kelly actually asked, does the panel think that a changing curriculum is needed to be able to meet the changing world and its realities for it? All your hands went up there, basically. So first person to get their mic on. Hala, did you want to go first? Did you put your hand up? I think.
Georgia? Hala?
Yes, I was going to say I totally agree with this comment on the need to change the curriculum, but I'd say rebalancing the curriculum rather than totally changing it. And by rebalancing the curriculum, I mean it's about time really to start to integrate into the curriculum the skill that we've been preaching for ages. We start to include the 21st century skills. We need to include digital citizenship skills, empathetic listening skills, social emotional intelligence, lots of skills that we need. I mean, the new reality has forced these skills. It's not kidding anymore. It's not preaching. It's not fancy thing anymore. It has to be put in practice, starting from the curriculum, and to put that into the application in the classroom. So yes, I totally agree. Rebalance the curriculum and start to include soft skills and 21st century skills with this whole range of new skills.
Georgia, I think you've been trying to get in, so do you want to go?
I was going to actually say something completely similar to what Hala said, that now that we have started creating long-term solutions, this is the case with curriculum as well, the core curriculum as well. So I will just give you an example. For example, using board games in class, nowadays, because there are new policies, for example, no handouts, no touching, staying away from each other. This is now our opportunity to look at this. For example, how we can use board games in a different way, how to move beyond that, and how we can move towards real world activities and real world tasks. And these need to be implemented in the new curriculum. And as Hala said, but not creating something completely new, but mainly rebalancing.
Mm-hmm.
So in India, we recently got the new education policy very recently, and it came out after 30 years with a big focus on, teacher development, collaborative methodology, communicative methodology, and for schools and for higher education. It's very, very ambitious. Then, given that it's a big country, maybe this will resonate with people who are watching, and maybe it's like that where they are based as well. So then different states, how do they, implement the policy? And more than anything, the central government saying that do this, do that, fine, but states then have the money, don't have the money to take it forward the way it was envisioned is another thing. The point I'm trying to make is whatever it is, it has to be a long-term view, curriculum-wise, and it has to come with a lot of investment in every which way from the governments. It can't be a single school or, chain of schools response. Governments have to work in a unified fashion if that change has to come through.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Paul, there is a question in the chat box, perhaps a comment, and they think that digital citizenship and 21st century skills are quite important, but they don't know how to find resources on them. And I'd like just to throw a couple of useful resources very quickly. The Facebook Digital Citizenship, they launched a new application with lots of resources, and the Edmodo as well. They have this icon. If you have an Edmodo account, you can tap on Discover, and there is a good collection of social emotional learning activities as well as mindfulness activities, and this all revolve around the 21st century skills and critical thinking and all of that stuff.
The social emotional aspect, we talked about inclusivity from a digital have and digital have not point of view, I think, but I think we've also, and it's come up a few times in this morning sessions, and questions are coming through now, how do we deal with I guess there's different aspects to this question. This topic, sorry, do you feel that the current situation is going to lead to people dropping out of education, but also then how do we deal with people, the inclusivity aspect of special educational needs, which I think people don't see as served well online with that. Well, I'll leave those two aspects. There is more of it. So this idea, do you think, are people going to simply drop out of education because of the situation? And how can teachers best face inclusivity if we take on board other needs of our students? Again, hands up, who wants to go first? Hands down, everybody's down. Go on, Graham, thank you.
Graham.
Yeah, I think it's important, Sean. I think you're right. The big danger that we feel now is that there's so many children in particular that are going to miss out on education. They're going to lose out on an education. We're going to have a generation that actually is left behind, and whatever we can do to help that, or to stop that from happening, wherever we are in the educational system in our countries, world, regions, I think it's important, supporting each other. I think it can't be left just to teachers, though. It has to be on a larger scale. It has to be solutions that are on a national scale, on a regional scale, on a local scale, on a school scale. We all have to sort of take an active role in trying to innovate. And I think innovation is the only way that we're going to be able to solve these problems, really, to really think creatively and to get work together and to share ideas. This what we're doing today is so important, to be able to get input from other people in other countries and try to get what should our focus be on. As you said, there are all sorts of different aspects of things. I don't think there are any easy answers though, but I think if we can all try and pull together, then we can help so many more children get access to education. And if we don't become sort of active participants in this, then would there be the case?
I think, sorry, I know I'm not a panelist, I'm sort of hosting, but I just
you'll be a panelist if you want.
Can I just sort of jump in just very, very quickly? I think I'm just sort of thinking about this and how we need to be inclusive, and I think a lot of work is already kind of going on, and I don't think that the kind of the pandemic or COVID-19 has meant that people have gone, oh, we didn't really think about that before, and now we need to start thinking about it. It's something which I think has already sort of, there's a lot of enthusiasm for that, and a lot of need, and a lot of people are doing a lot of good things. So obviously it's a question of maintaining that kind of motivation, I think, to continue working in that way, to make education as inclusive as possible, but obviously within the context of COVID, and as you were saying, Graham, and then over the next 5 years where things aren't necessarily going to be the same, and just sort of tweaking and adjusting. Obviously, yes, if you're working in a context where you're having to deliver classes remotely, then that's going to have an impact on people with different socio-economic backgrounds, and also certain disabilities. So it's really a question of starting with those people and building it from them, and then everyone else can kind of I don't want to sort of sound like everyone else is less important, but I think that there are needs that some people have greater needs, and those are the needs that need to be addressed first. That was just my thoughts. Sorry.
Thanks, Paul. Lovely. Anybody else want to go on this topic?
Talking about special education needs, especially when we operate in a face-to-face class, we can be reactive, because there are certain needs which are visible, certain needs which are not visible. But when you interact with the students daily, they come to the fore, and you get a chance to find out more and take appropriate action. However, this is much harder when you are on a virtual platform, whichever one it is. But it is important to, as Paul said, address those needs, but then the solution can't be a reactive solution. It has to be pre-planned, so that in that classroom, you've already taken care of what the needs are for those special students, and they don't feel left out while you're training or teaching. So that's what I'd say. It has to have happened before, but you need to, and your students, you will always have an opportunity to speak to them, speak to the parents, dig deeper, and then bring that into your planning. Otherwise, you can't just do it. Okay, I noticed it in the class. What do I do now? That has to happen before the lesson.
Perhaps I can add something on a possible response to the digital divide and the inequities resulted from the digital move, and depending, or even the over dependence on technology and to respond to the COVID crisis, is perhaps that my message now is not for teachers strictly, but for maybe program managers or policymakers, or or school leaders. I think there is a need to think about how different entities can work together on the country level. And I think Graham mentioned how Mexico used the radio service to broadcast lessons for the students. And I think this concept of ecosystem is essential these days. So not everybody in the country has got internet access, not everybody has got a smartphone, but if different systems or this idea of the ecosystem is implemented within the country. So we have the communication companies, we have the ministries of education, we have the radio, we have the TV, we have another entity in France, for example, they use the La Poste. It's like the mailing services to deliver printed materials to the learners' doorsteps. So this kind of harmony, working together in harmony and bringing all of these entities together just for the purpose of, you know, catering for different people with different socio-economical backgrounds. That's one thing. The other thing is, I think a side effect of the digital divide is the learning loss. So many students have gone through this. They lost some of the learning. And I think perhaps one of the things that the school leaders or perhaps the system leaders need to do when we're back to school is to think about accelerated learning programs or crash courses or something, just to compensate for the loss of learning the students have been through the past 6 months. That's all my input here.
And Georgia, again, you were trying. You're too polite. You sit there, just jump in. Go on. What did you want to add?
I just want to add, because Sean mentioned before something also really important, that a lot of teachers started dropping out, and a lot of teachers started looking at different careers and jobs and different opportunities. So the question is why and how we can minimize the number, because we've seen our workload being maximized. We've seen teachers going above and beyond, and we've seen teachers being creative to the extent that the balance between work and personal life has changed. So I think that beyond all this technology, because these are all very good ideas, we also need to consider that solid lesson planning and pedagogy must drive technology. So before we move on to thinking, oh my goodness, how can I mark my students' writing? Or how can I use Padlet or Google Docs or Zoom, etc.? We need to first consider how our own teaching pedagogy can drive this technology.
A very good point, Georgia. If I can just add something, I think another thing that I think, you know, I think it was you that mentioned the idea of reflective journals. I think that idea of reflecting on practice, if you're teaching, in particular when you're teaching in this new situation, is so important, and to get feedback from the learners. And if you want to go a step further, I think teachers could also look at action research. So anything that they're trying to do which is new in the classroom, that they want to try with. I think the idea of putting to practice something new and actually looking for evidence from the students to try and look at an evidence-based approach to the change in practice is something that, if you as a teacher feel you have time, of course, to do, because it does take extra time, might reap a lot of benefits.
You're okay with me continuing, Paul, or do you want to change the thing?
No.
Okay, I'm going to hark back to this word creativity that I think all of you have mentioned at least once now. And on Facebook, Barry says creative teachers adapt to change and remain resilient amazingly. So if we just take this word, if creativity is part of the solution, how can teachers be creative? I mean, Georgia gave the example of reflective journal there, which I would say is one point. So at this moment in time, what tips could we give teachers to help them be creative or to tap into their creativity in this situation?
Can I go first?
Please.
Yeah. So I think a teacher should rely on multiple technologies so that she can reach as many of her students or participants as possible. Secondly, I mean, there's a whole lot of content that exists. So curate that, you know, rather than starting from scratch or developing content. Of course, all that is available. You can adapt it, use it, you know, as in how it fits the needs of your students. But it's all about taking that informed approach that, okay, this is what works best for my students, but rather than, planning everything every time from scratch. That's what my advice would be.
Thank you. Georgia, go for it.
I just need to mention one very practical tip that saved my life this year, I think, and that's the snipping tool.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I think we can all agree that the Oscar goes to the snipping tool.
I agree, totally concur.
Mainly mentioning this because, for example, apart from the technology that we're using, for example, as I mentioned before, Padlet, Flipgrid, or whatever else, I think that we need to look at the exercises that each course book has from a different perspective. For example, if you have a listening task that has got a lot of numbers or a lot of words, then just recreate the listening. For example, just give your students first the words to guess and then ask them to listen and then find out the story. Mini tricks like that, how we can adjust the exercises instead of just our students to listen and then complete the exercise. There's so much more we can do with the exercises that exist in the course books and in our materials. And I think that this is the most important point.
Yeah, I agree with you, Georgia. Sorry, Sean. I think rethinking how you teach is an important aspect of this. Again, not everyone has the time to do that, but if you can look at and investigate flipped learning, for example, I think you don't have to be present with your students synchronously if you're teaching remotely all of the time. You can persuade your students to become more autonomous learners. You can try and get them to see that if they can work before classroom doing a particular reading and preparation for the class, for example, it's in their benefit. And they don't need, you and the students don't need to be online at the same time while you're waiting for them to read something, etc. There's a lot of things that you can do to really, as we've all talked about before, think about the pedagogy of online learning and teaching. What works? What's different about teaching online to teaching face-to-face? You're not physically present with the students, but how can you make that an advantage and a benefit rather than a disadvantage, and something that as we all tend to think it's not as good as face-to-face teaching, okay, but there are some things that you can do better. So for example, you can persuade students to record themselves if you have the permissions in place, and actually them preparing to record short video reports, for example, or short audio reports. They'll spend a lot of time practicing, rehearsing, even some of them will write out the script, and there's so much benefit they can get from the language practice there that isn't visible to the teacher, but actually is so beneficial. And the excuse is the fact that they can't do it live in a classroom, but actually you can turn it to your advantage as a teacher if you think about it. Things like that I think are really worthwhile exploring at the moment.
So Graham, there's a tool called Talk and Comment, which just fits the purpose for what you're saying. You can record and just send the link, and the students can do the same.
Yeah, Flipgrid as well is another great tool that has videos and as a way of putting rubrics and marking them as well.
It seems to me, I think that actually what you've done there is reframe. I think a lot of people, when they think of the education that's going online in this situation now, and going back to when, say, March, when this really started, they equate online learning with what we're doing now, being in a synchronous room with, in Zoom or one of those platforms. But in fact, what you're suggesting, I think, or the ideas you're suggesting, kind of lead to that idea that we should be balancing almost asynchronicity with it, which is one of the last the speakers mentioned in the last panel mentioned as well. That I think a lot of us are framing the lens as synchronous and connected together, where in fact asynchronous has got a lot and will actually perhaps address a number of the issues that we've raised today.
there's a lot of association, I think, with the sort of the live synchronous thing in some places with this kind of rote learning, where obviously the teacher is going to then is the sort of the giver of information. Students get that information, they have to remember as much of it as possible and then churn it out in an exam, which obviously is something that I think most of us would agree is not the best way of learning, and it's something that we want to kind of move away from. The asynchronous idea is very much that it's very much more about the students sort of sharing their responsibility for the learning and taking ownership of that, and by doing so becoming more enthusiastic about learning in terms of what they're learning and how they're learning it. I think where that, I'd be very surprised if there's possibly people who disagree that is a good way of learning, but where it needs to change is in the systems themselves, and in the sort of pre-service training and then the in-service training and so on, so that is something which sort of follows through, perhaps. Okay. So I was just going to look at another question rather than just sort of adding comments. Let's talk about age and sort of that affecting online learning, working with university students, high school students, working with sort of 10-year-olds being very different. Obviously, I think teenagers are very different to sort of 7-year-olds, and similarly, mature students at university. Do you have any kind of advice or any kind of experience of how the kind of the pandemic and moving to a different way of teaching, how that's affected different age groups, and what can be done for that? So I like throwing in little questions, that aren't big.
I think irrespective of the age group, one thing which I think should cut across would be that one should involve the students in the decision-making process so that they're more invested in it, even if they're 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds or university students, in terms of the lessons you're conducting, the choice of topics that they want to talk about, or the activities that they'd like to do to get their motivation going, get higher engagement. I think that stays the same, because we would like all our students to be engaged and interested in what's going on. But of course, the types of activities would vary, what you could try with younger learners or young learners.
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of thinking, obviously, with teenagers, that we all know, sort of with adolescents, they sort of become sort of monosyllabic at some point, and generally sort of reluctant to do anything other than, I don't know, sit in their bedrooms or whatever. Perhaps more with kind of young learners, where that with primary students, where there is so much more sort of tactileness. What's the noun for tactile? Whatever that is, that's what it is.
Tactfulness.
600 language teachers in the room. You think we'll get an answer?
The noun for tactile, please. And play. How do we deal with that kind of phenomenon of kids and play and physicality?
I mean, I think, Paul, the most important thing here is the same as face-to-face teaching, is knowing your learners, knowing them, not just knowing that teenagers, what teenagers are like compared to younger students or compared to adults, what they kind of generally like, but also knowing them as people and treating them as individuals as well. I think all good teachers do that anyway. You get to know your students, you ask them, you establish a relationship with them, you bond with them as much as possible, of course, because if you have a very large class, then it can be very challenging, especially if you have very many large classes. But I think then you appeal to their interests. So with teenagers, I think, they have a particular challenge in that, you said monosyllabic, disinterested. What's happening in your classroom is not the most important thing in their life. They've got all sorts of other things that they're worrying about. Bringing that into the classroom, if you can, in a safe way, that they're comfortable with to a certain extent, is a way of, bringing their lives back into the room and making what you're doing in the classroom relevant and interesting to them. Or it may be the opposite is true. You may find with your learners what works better is actually distracting them. It's like taking them away from their problems and issues, and using games and using things that are going to, really sort of bring an element of diversion into the learning. So I think the important thing there is just really is getting to know your learners and what works and trying it out.
Yeah, good advice.
I think also if we've been talking about how cell or social emotional learning is important for all age groups. I think it's probably very important for teenagers with all of the emotional roller coaster they are naturally on. And a couple of examples of cell activities we can do with the teenagers is the well-being check-ins. It's a very simple thing, like, how are you feeling today? And the idea of the activity is to get them to articulate and name and label their feelings and emotions. And as Graham said, bringing what's going on in their mind and in their lives to the classroom, whether it's a virtual classroom or visual or physical classroom. So another thing also is the emotional planner. It's like, how am I feeling today, and how am I going to feel tomorrow, because tomorrow I have a tennis game or something. It's finding ways for teenagers to speak out and articulate their feelings and emotional. It's important in a normal situation, let alone during a global pandemic.
Time, yeah.
Just mindful of time, Paul. There's about 4 minutes.
Yes, three according to my clock, but that's probably a time difference thing. Yes, yeah, true. That's a shame. We're going to have to wrap up, actually. It's gone incredibly quickly at that hour. I suppose really, I don't know. I don't want to kind of do this thing at the end where you go, any closing statements where
so what is the future of education?
Yeah, expected to say something inspirational in a soundbite. But I'm going to do it anyway.
I thought you were going to say we were going to do it differently.
Oh, we could try. We could flip it. We could ask the participants any final inspirational comments for the panelists or something. But it's a bit odd. There's about 700 people, so it might take a while.
I would say, as of my final comment in the World Teachers Day, is that teachers and teacher educators really need to be declared as the first responders to this crisis. They are in the front line, and I think their safety, well-being, and mental health and their protection is a duty on everybody, starting from, I don't know, the head of state, head of educational system, parents, PTAs, everybody. I think their protection and well-being comes first. That's my message in the World Teachers Day for everybody who's listening to us.
Thank you.
And I'm going to say that no teacher is an island, and that on World Teachers Day, that's the reason why I have that back.
It's all there for
Get that comment in. And on World Teachers Day, I think it's helpful to think that, this kind of event brings us together. We are teachers in a world, and we have a lot in common. In particular, this crisis has put that into focus, and we can help each other. And please help where you can. Go and ask for help if you need it. That's my final comment.
Thank you, Graham.
Yeah, I agree, because you're not alone. There are a lot of teachers, teacher educators who feel the same way as somebody in India might feel, the teacher in Pakistan or Bangladesh or Nepal. Everybody's in the same boat, and just reach out and be there for your colleagues. It's help is just a shout away. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kamini and Georgia. No pressure. The last person.
I was going to say, just don't forget how far you've come and the skills that you've developed in no time. So just remember what you've done this year. Sit back, relax, drink a sip of your favorite drink, and then just take a moment to reflect and see how you can continue changing the way you think about education, and then this will take you forward.
Thank you very much, Georgia. I suppose my final word is going to be about certificates, but I'll
Yeah.
leave that until afterwards.
I'm actually quite disappointed that after Graham got the island in, that Hala didn't get in something about teachers being out of this world. You know,
Yeah.
just...
Come on.
No, so I think we have to say thank you very much to our panelists for some thoughtful ideas, but some really good practical ideas as well. And I think that balance is important. And as somebody just said, I think if nothing else, what the panel has proven is that teachers around the world, we're pretty much all in the same situation, and you know that our contexts might feel different, but in fact, what's happening is happening to us all in very similar ways. So I think that's a reassuring thing in a strange way. But thank you all for joining us. And there's a cat.
Oh, it's a real cat as well.
Yeah, I know. So while you all go, oh, look at the cat. thank you all for that. I'll stop the recording, Paul, and let you.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. No, thank you.